Why was everyone laughing? The question hung in the cold air of the training hangar, though no one said it aloud. Their laughter was sharp, young, confident, and cruel. It bounced off the concrete walls of the kill house, the echo of arrogance filling the space where humility should have lived. A woman stood among them, quiet, average height, her hair pulled back in a neat, practical knot. She wore the same training fatigues as everyone else, but hers were different, faded from 1,000 washes, seams frayed, color nearly gone. The fabric carried history. The others carried pride. She didn't look up. Her hands moved with slow precision, checking the weight, slide, and chamber of an M17 service pistol. Every motion was deliberate, efficient. It wasn't performance, it was ritual. "Is that thing heavier than you are?" Lieutenant Commander Reynolds smirked, voice dripping with the confidence of someone who'd never been truly tested. The cadets chuckled. They always did. He was their idol, top of his class, born from theory, raised on command. His hair perfect, his uniform immaculate. But perfection can be a fragile thing. Up on the observation deck, an admiral leaned forward, eyes narrowing behind the glass. 4 stars on his shoulder and more scars on his face than any man in the room could count. He'd seen battle, real battle. He watched the woman below, her posture unshaken under the ridicule. He saw something the others didn't, the way her thumb found the magazine release without looking, the shift of her weight to her heels, the subtle quiet that follows people who have seen the edge and stepped back. He didn't see a visitor, he saw a ghost. "All right, listen up," Reynolds barked. Scenario: active hostage situation. 2 hostiles, 1 civilian. You enter, neutralize the threats, secure the hostage. Speed. Surprise. Violence of action, that's what wins. Got it? The cadets nodded like trained parrots. Reynolds paced like a man auditioning for authority. Then he stopped in front of her. "You," he said, pointing. "You want to play with the big dogs, be our team leader, show us how it's done." Her gaze stayed fixed on the pistol. The magazine slid into place with a sharp metallic click, the kind of sound that meant finality, a sound that didn't ask for permission. It silenced the laughter for a heartbeat. That single sound, cold and mechanical, carried more power than any words she could have spoken. The cadets waited for an excuse, a protest, a flicker of fear, but none came. She adjusted the strap of her holster and gave one slow nod. Not submission. Acceptance. The room changed. You could feel it, something invisible shifting, the air thick with unspoken challenge. Reynolds smirked again, masking the tiny tremor that had just begun to creep into his voice. "All right then, let's see what you've got." The red warning light above the steel door blinked on, flooding the room with a pulse of crimson. The smell of gun oil and cold metal filled every breath. The kill house was ready. The speaker crackled overhead, sterile, emotionless. "Shooter ready." She raised her head slightly, eyes steady, breathing calm. Her fingers rested lightly along the frame of her weapon. "Ready," she said quietly. Reynolds folded his arms. He was already rehearsing the lesson he'd deliver after her failure, a speech about limits, about knowing one's place. But failure is a funny thing. Sometimes it changes its target. "Execute." The door opened with a hiss. She didn't rush. She moved like gravity itself had changed, silent, deliberate, controlled. No wasted motion. The pistol followed her eyes, sweeping the corner in a single, fluid arc. Slicing the pie, the old-timers called it, the art of revealing death 1 inch at a time. To the cadets it was textbook. To her it was instinct. Inside the room, 2 dummy hostiles waited, rubber weapons in hand, a third, the hostage, tied to a chair. 2 gunshots broke the silence, then 2 more. 4. That was all. It was over before most of them realized it had started. The echoes died, replaced by the suffocating quiet of disbelief. The red light stopped flashing. "Time?" the admiral asked, his voice low. 2.7 seconds. came the reply from the range officer, voice trembling slightly. All hits center mass and head. Hostage safe. No one breathed. Reynolds' smirk evaporated, replaced by the pale stillness of a man watching his certainty collapse. He stared at her as she holstered her weapon, no theatrics, no emotion. Her movements were as calm as when she'd loaded the pistol. She turned, eyes meeting his just for a moment. There was no triumph in them, no anger, just nothing. And that nothing hurt more than any insult could. He had looked at her and seen weakness. She had looked at him and seen irrelevance. Above, the admiral whispered something to himself, words no one could hear. Then he left the platform, boots thudding against the metal stairs. Every cadet straightened when he entered. Authority didn't need to speak. It entered the room like weather. He stopped in front of her. For a long moment, silence reigned again. Then a single word. Report. Her voice was steady, almost surgical. Entered from the left. First target 5 meters, 2 shots to chest. Second target 7 meters using hostage as cover, 2 shots, head and eye socket. No collateral damage. The admiral nodded once. No reaction, no praise, just acknowledgment. Reynolds tried to speak but only managed a whisper. That can't be right, run the simulation again. The admiral's gaze turned toward him, sharp as a blade. Cadet Reynolds. He froze. Do you have a question about the shooter's performance? Reynolds swallowed. Sir, it's not a standard result, sir. The admiral's eyes darkened. No, it is, because she's not a standard sailor. He motioned to a technician, pull up her file. The large digital display on the wall flickered to life. Lines of text filled the screen, rank, service history, commendations. Then a name appeared at the top. Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma. The room fell dead silent. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, SEAL Team 6. The file scrolled, deployments, classified missions, silver stars, bronze stars, purple hearts, too many to count. Lines blacked out by security restrictions, the kind of redactions that meant real things. Things no one was supposed to see. The cadets stared at her, really stared this time, and saw what they'd missed all along. The scars, the calm, the eyes that never blinked too long. She wasn't quiet because she was shy. She was quiet because she'd learned what noise costs. The admiral turned back to Reynolds, voice low but lethal. You judged her because she didn't look the part. You mocked her because she didn't sound like you. You confused silence for weakness. He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing Reynolds whole. That's not just a mistake, cadet. That's a failure of leadership. Every word landed like a hammer. The admiral paused, then faced the class. Let this be your first real lesson. The deadliest person in the room is never the one making the most noise. He turned toward Anya. Then, to everyone's shock, he saluted her. 4 stars, saluting a chief. Thank you, Chief, he said quietly. That was instructive. She returned the salute with the same calm precision as everything else she did. My pleasure, Admiral. And just like that, she was gone, a shadow fading into silence. But silence sometimes echoes louder than a gunshot. That day, the cadets didn't just witness a drill. They witnessed humility, forced upon arrogance like judgment itself. And somewhere deep in that silence, Reynolds learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did she just walk away? The question whispered through the hangar long after the echo of her footsteps had vanished. No one dared say it out loud, not after what they'd seen. The silence she left behind was heavier than any reprimand, thicker than shame itself. Cadet Reynolds stood frozen, staring at the killhouse door as if it still held her outline. The pistol in his holster felt suddenly absurd, like a toy. His mouth was dry, his chest hollow. He had been so certain of himself, so utterly sure. And in less than 3 seconds, she had dismantled that certainty, without saying a single word. Around him, the cadets shifted uneasily. Their laughter had died long before the admiral's salute, and in its place grew something far more uncomfortable: awareness. Awareness that they had mocked a legend. Awareness that they'd mistaken mastery for mediocrity. Reynolds' voice cracked as he tried to recover. "All right," he muttered, forcing a thin smile that was informative. No one responded. Their eyes avoided his. He wasn't their leader anymore, just a man caught between humiliation and disbelief. The admiral stood near the door, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Debrief in 10 minutes," he said quietly. And then he left. When he was gone, the air seemed to loosen, but not in relief. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a lightning strike, when everyone realizes how close the burn had come. Reynolds walked to the bench where she had laid her weapon. It was still warm to the touch. He didn't know what he was looking for, some sign that what had happened was humanly possible. But all he found was the faint smell of gun oil and the echo of calm competence. Up in the observation deck, Admiral Hayes watched the scene from behind the glass again. He didn't smile. He'd seen this pattern before, pride cracked open by reality. It wasn't the first time a lesson like this had been needed, but it was rare that it was taught so perfectly. He glanced at the wall clock, 2.7 seconds. He'd been in combat zones where entire lives had changed in less time. "Still got it," he murmured under his breath, not about himself but about her. Chief Petty Officer Anya Sharma. He hadn't seen her in years, not since the last classified deployment, the one that had ended in dust, blood, and silence. And yet here she was again, doing what she'd always done best, letting truth speak louder than rank. Down below, the cadets began to pack up. No one spoke. The scrape of boots and the clack of metal sounded too loud in the quiet. Each of them carried a private replay of what they'd just seen: 4 shots, perfect precision, total composure. But the part that stayed with them most wasn't the skill, it was the stillness. Reynolds caught his reflection in the mirrored glass of the control booth. For the first time, he didn't recognize the man staring back. Arrogance had a look, he could see that now. And it looked a lot like him. He ran a hand through his perfect hair. It felt ridiculous now, the effort, the vanity. "Jesus," he whispered, "what the hell was I thinking?" A voice from behind him answered, calm and unexpected. "She didn't teach you to shoot, Reynolds. She taught you to listen." It was the Admiral. He had returned without a sound. Reynolds straightened automatically, old habits kicking in. "Sir, Don't," Hayes interrupted. "Just don't." He stepped closer, his tone neither harsh nor kind. "You think I brought her here to embarrass you?" Reynolds hesitated. "Didn't you?" Hayes' eyes narrowed. "I brought her here because I needed someone to remind you what humility looks like. You're smart, Reynolds, skilled. But skill without humility is a loaded weapon with no safety." The younger man swallowed hard. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Hayes asked quietly. "Because understanding isn't the same as changing." The words hit like a blow, not because of their volume, but because of how softly they were delivered. Hayes turned toward the door. "Clean this place up. Tomorrow morning you'll write a full reflection report, not on the drill, on yourself." Then he was gone again, leaving Reynolds alone with his thoughts. Night settled over the training compound. Outside, the desert wind howled through the metal fences, carrying the smell of salt and dust. The lights in the kill house flickered one by one, leaving only the faint glow of the brass plaque near the entrance. It had been mounted years ago, back when this facility had first opened. It read, "Precision is a reflection of patience." Reynolds sat on the floor against the wall, staring at it. He felt smaller than he'd ever felt, but for the first time, that didn't feel entirely bad. Maybe humility wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the first step toward something real. He opened his notebook, the same one he'd filled with tactical theories and command quotes. He tore out every page. Then on a fresh sheet, he wrote one sentence. Never mistake silence for softness. He underlined it twice. 2 hangars away, in the dimly lit locker corridor, Anya stood in front of a cracked mirror. She unbuttoned the top of her uniform, shoulders stiff from the day's weight. The reflection staring back wasn't heroic. It was tired, scarred, human. She rubbed the bridge of her nose and let out a slow breath. The drill hadn't been about proving anything, not for her. She didn't need to. She hadn't needed to for years. But sometimes, a lesson isn't for the one who teaches it. Sometimes it's for the ones who watch and remember. Her hands, steady, precise, weathered, traced the edges of her sleeve where the patches had long since faded. She remembered the missions those threads had seen, the noise, the chaos, the quiet that followed. She buried too many voices to count, and yet hers still carried that same calm tone, the tone of someone who had learned that control is the last form of courage. Someone knocked lightly on the locker door. Jiva. It was the Admiral again. She didn't turn. You shouldn't be here, sir, makes them nervous. He smiled faintly. They could use a little nervous. A pause, the kind of pause shared by people who have seen too much to fill silence with small talk. Then he said, you didn't have to do that. You could have refused the demo. I didn't do it for you, she replied softly. I know. He leaned against the doorframe. You were always better with bullets than speeches. That earned the smallest flicker of a smile. Words echo, bullets end things. Hayes nodded, and yet sometimes words are what survive. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark but alive, a storm that never found rest. Those kids needed to see what happens when pride leads. They saw, Hayes said, and so did Reynolds. Whether he learns from it, we'll see. Anya turned back to the mirror. He will. The ones who break usually do. Hayes studied her for a long moment. You never liked the spotlight, did you? I don't need it, she said. The mission doesn't care about applause. He nodded again, slower this time. Still, what you did today. She cut him off gently. I didn't do anything, sir. I just reminded them what quiet looks like when it's earned. The Admiral let out a low exhale. You always had a poetic way of making me feel useless. She smirked. That's because you talk too much, Admiral. And for the first time that day, both of them laughed, quiet, honest, short-lived. The next morning, the story had already spread. Across the base, whispers carried faster than radio signals. The Kill House Drill, they called it, the one where the cadets learned how wrong they could be. They spoke her name in fragments, Chief Sharma, the Silent Seal, the Ghost in Fatigues. But no one really knew her story, not the real one. And that's how she wanted it. Legends live longer in the dark. She was gone before sunrise. No farewell, no orders left behind. Just an empty locker and the faint scent of oil and dust. A shadow returning to whatever world had built her. For Reynolds, that silence stayed. When he walked into the kill house the next day, something felt different. The walls seemed heavier. He stood at the same spot where she had once stood, raised his weapon, and imagined what she saw, not the targets, but the space between them. The pauses, the choices, the quiet rhythm between life and death. He fired 4 times. The shots echoed off the concrete, close, precise, but not perfect. He checked the timer, 4.9 seconds. He smiled. It wasn't good enough, not yet. But for the first time, he wanted to earn it the right way. Because now, he understood something he hadn't before. The kill house wasn't built to test your aim. It was built to test your ego. And for the first time in his life, Reynolds aimed for silence. What made her like that? The question haunted Reynolds. It followed him from the range to the barracks, from the shower steam to the sleepless nights that stretched into dawn. He had replayed those 2.7 seconds so many times his mind could recite every breath, every shift of her weight, every flicker in her eyes. But the part that he couldn't shake wasn't her precision, it was her calm. How could someone walk through chaos with that kind of silence? He started searching, quietly, carefully. Officially, Chief Anya Sharma was just another name in a sea of classified ink, her record redacted, her missions coded. But every rumor carried the same whisper. She'd seen something that broke others. Something that didn't break her, but didn't leave her whole either. Reynolds wanted to understand, not out of curiosity but out of guilt. He had mocked what he didn't comprehend, and now comprehension had become an obsession. The Admiral had told him to write a reflection. He did 10 pages, honest, raw, but it didn't feel finished, because the story didn't feel finished. He found himself walking past her old locker every night. Still unclaimed, still silent. The tag above it, CPOASHARMA, had started to fade, the paint chipped from where someone had once slammed it shut. He touched the metal once, and it felt cold, like the door to somewhere he wasn't yet ready to open. 3 weeks later, Admiral Hayes called him into his office. The Admiral's desk was covered in files, maps, and the smell of black coffee that had burned an hour ago. Hayes didn't look up right away. When he did, his expression was a mix of calculation and fatigue. "You've been digging," he said flatly. Reynolds stiffened. "Sir, You think I don't notice? You're not the first to go looking for her story." The Admiral sighed and leaned back. "And you won't be the last." "I wasn't trying to pry, sir. I just—" He hesitated. "I need to understand." Hayes studied him. "Understand what?" Reynolds searched for the right words. "How someone can be that controlled, that empty and still human." The Admiral nodded slowly. "She wasn't always like that." He turned his chair toward the window, where the wind rattled the blinds like small, nervous fingers. Before she became a SEAL, she was a helicopter pilot, Navy Search and Rescue, 2011, Operation Northern Wind. He paused. A dust storm hit an evac zone. Their bird went down, 12 aboard. Reynolds swallowed, and only one came back, Hayes said quietly. Her. The silence that followed was heavy, not the kind that demanded comfort, the kind that demanded respect. Reynolds lowered his eyes. "What happened to the others?" Hayes didn't answer directly. "You ever wonder why she doesn't talk much?" Reynolds nodded. "She used to," Hayes said. "Too much, maybe. Laughing, arguing, calling out orders over the rotors. But the night they found her, she wasn't talking. She was just digging, bare hands in the sand, trying to reach what was left of the crew." Reynolds felt a chill crawl up his spine. "She kept digging until her nails came off," the Admiral continued, voice barely above a whisper. "Didn't stop until the medics pulled her away. They said she didn't scream, didn't cry, just kept saying, 'We were almost there,' over and over." He turned back to Reynolds. "That's what silence looks like when it starts." The younger man sat motionless, trying to process it. "Sir, if she's been through that much, why is she still active duty?" "She's not." The Admiral's tone hardened. "She consults, special assignments, no unit, no rank chain, just ghosts like me who know when to call her." He let the words hang, then added quietly, "Some people don't retire, they just fade between the pages." Reynolds exhaled. "I didn't mean to disrespect her, sir. Hayes raised a hand. "You already paid that price. What matters now is what you do with it." He slid a small envelope across the desk. Inside was a set of coordinates. A training site out in the desert, no name, no designation. "She's there," Hayes said, "running a short-term course for advanced operators. You want to learn, really learn, show up tomorrow, 0600. Don't wear the bars, just your name." Reynolds blinked. "You're serious?" The Admiral's expression didn't change. "This isn't an order, Reynolds. It's an invitation." Dawn crept across the desert like a whispered confession. Reynolds drove in silence, the hum of the engine mixing with the sound of his own pulse. When he arrived, the site looked nothing like a base. No gates, no guards, no flags, just an abandoned airstrip carved into the sand. A figure stood near the old hangar, small, solid, motionless. It was her. He stopped the engine, stepped out, and felt the sun hit his face like judgment. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind filled the space between them. Then she said, "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, low, steady, almost detached. "I was invited," he said. "By who?" "Admiral Hayes." That earned him a brief glance. "Then you must have done something stupid." He half smiled. "That's accurate." She turned away. "Then you're in the right place." The next few hours felt like a blur of exhaustion and revelation. The training wasn't physical, not at first. It was mental, psychological. Silence drills, she called them. Observation, breathing, waiting. He learned how to listen not for sound but for rhythm, for intent, for hesitation. "Noise," she said, "is what kills people who think they're ready." By midday, his hands trembled from the stillness. He had fired only 2 rounds the entire day, both into sand, both mistakes. "You're thinking too loud," she said simply. He wanted to argue, he didn't. She handed him a new magazine. "Try again, but this time stop trying to prove you can shoot, just don't miss." The words hit him deeper than he expected. He took the stance again, inhaled slowly, and for the first time he didn't hear his own ego echoing back. Only breath. Only wind. 2 shots. Perfect. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened just a fraction. "Better," she said. He lowered the gun. "You make it look easy." "It's not," she said. "It's just simple. That's the part people confuse." He hesitated. "Admiral Hayes told me about the crash." Her hands froze just slightly. When she looked at him, it wasn't anger. It was something colder. "He shouldn't have." "He didn't tell me everything," Reynolds said quietly. "Just enough to understand why you don't talk much." She stepped closer. "Understanding isn't the same as knowing." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to learn from you." Her gaze held his sharp, dissecting, searching for arrogance and finding only sincerity. After a moment, she said, "Learning from me isn't easy. It means losing parts of yourself you think you need." "Then I'll lose them," he said. The desert wind rose, tossing a cloud of dust between them. When it cleared, she was already walking toward the horizon. "Then follow," she said without turning. They walked for hours, no destination, no conversation. Just heat, wind, and the soft crunch of boots against sand. It felt less like a march and more like a confession. Finally, as the sun began to dip, she stopped on a ridge overlooking an old wreck, the charred skeleton of a helicopter. Reynolds recognized it from the briefing photos. "Is that?" "Yes," she said. He waited for more. None came. She knelt, brushing sand away from a bent rotor blade, her movements slow and reverent. "I come here once a year," she said softly. "Not for them, for me." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Some grief doesn't need translation. She stood, eyes distant. "You asked what made me like this. It wasn't that crash. It was what came after." "What do you mean?" "When I got back, they called me resilient, strong, a survivor." She smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile at all. "They pinned medals to my chest while I still had sand under my nails, but nobody wanted to hear how it felt to dig." Reynolds' throat tightened. "So I stopped talking," she continued, "and I learned something." "What?" "That silence doesn't mean peace. It just means discipline." The sun had fallen low now, cutting her face into halves, light and shadow. She looked at him. Discipline is what keeps you alive when the world wants you to scream. He nodded slowly. Come back tomorrow, she said. We start at dawn. Then she turned and walked toward the dying light, her silhouette dissolving into the horizon. The same way legends always do. Reynolds watched her go, his mind heavy but clear. For the first time, he understood that greatness wasn't about winning battles. It was about carrying the ones you lost quietly. And somewhere in that fatting desert silence, a new kind of respect began to grow. Not for her legend, but for her loneliness. What happens when silence starts to hurt? That was the thought running through Reynolds' mind as he lay flat on the cold desert floor, sweat dripping into the sand, heart pounding against the night. Anya had told him to hold position. Don't move, she'd said hours ago. Don't think, just listen. At first it had felt simple: discipline, focus, control. But now his muscles screamed, his knees trembled, and his breath turned to dust in his throat. The stars above him didn't blink. The desert didn't forgive. He wanted to ask her how long they'd been out here, but he already knew the answer. As long as it takes. A faint crunch of sand sounded to his left. He froze. Another step. Then another. Suddenly her voice calm, close. You're still breathing too loud. He exhaled, the air shaky. I've been lying here for hours. That's not a complaint, she said. That's an excuse. He turned his head slightly. She was crouched beside him, silhouette framed by the moonlight, rifle balanced across her knees. Her movements were fluid, quiet, like she belonged to the night itself. How do you do that? He whispered. Disappear like that. She tilted her head. I don't disappear, I just stop existing where they're looking. He stared at her for a moment, then looked back to the horizon. What are we waiting for? She smiled faintly. You're still thinking in hours, cadet. Out here we wait in consequences. The words sank in slowly, like the chill creeping up his spine. They stayed there until dawn, not because of the mission, because of the lesson. By morning, Reynolds' body was wrecked. His hands shook when he poured water from his canteen. Anya was already awake, cleaning her weapon with unhurried precision. Her face was unreadable, eyes calm and detached. He finally broke the silence. You don't sleep much, do you? Not since I stopped dreaming, she said flatly. He studied her. The way she said it wasn't dramatic, it was factual, like she'd long accepted that sleep was just a luxury she couldn't afford. What happened out there, Chief? The real story after the crash. She paused, then set the rifle down. You sure you want to know? He nodded. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon. For a long while she said nothing. Then, in a voice stripped of emotion, she began. We weren't supposed to land, she said. Dust storm came out of nowhere. Instruments failed. Visibility zero. The pilot tried to pull up too late. We hit the ridge. Her fingers tightened around the rifle stock. 2 died on impact. The rest were alive for a while. Reynolds didn't move. The radio was dead. I got out, tried to orient us. Then the second explosion hit fuel cell. After that, the fire came. She blinked once, slow and steady. There are sounds you don't forget, Reynolds. Screams under the rotor wash. Men begging for air that isn't there. He swallowed hard. I tried to pull them out, she continued. One by one. I don't remember how long. I just remember the weight. Not the bodies, the moment I realized I couldn't save them all. Her eyes met his. That's when silence started to feel holy. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came. She looked down at her hands, scarred and rough. They called me a survivor, but surviving isn't noble, it's messy, it's selfish, it's unfinished. A long pause. Only the desert wind answered her. Then she said quietly, that's why I joined the teams, because dying didn't scare me anymore. Failing did. Reynolds let the words sink in. He understood now. why her voice carried that cold edge of discipline, why she treated silence like an ally instead of an absence. It wasn't peace she'd found, it was control. He whispered, "You turned your grief into precision." She gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "And you're trying to turn your pride into humility, so maybe we're both rebuilding something." Training continued for days, long, brutal, endless. Reynolds wasn't learning tactics anymore. He was unlearning noise. Every drill was stripped of comfort. "Again," she'd say, after each imperfect movement. He'd shoot, miss by half an inch. Again. He'd move too fast. Again. He'd hesitate. Again. The rhythm of her instruction became a heartbeat. It wasn't punishment, it was transformation. By the end of the week, something inside him had shifted. He wasn't chasing approval anymore. He was chasing quiet. On the seventh day, they stood on the ridge again. The desert was golden under the sinking sun. She handed him a new pistol. "This is yours now," she said. "Not because you earned it, but because you stopped trying to." He frowned slightly. "That's a strange compliment." She smirked. "Competence always is." He took the pistol, feeling its weight, heavier than it should have been, not in metal but in meaning. Then she said something that froze him in place. "Tomorrow you lead." He blinked. "Lead what?" "Simulation, 2 targets, 1 civilian, you know the setup." "The kill house." She nodded once. "Time to see if you learned anything." Reynolds hesitated. "You're testing me." She met his gaze. "No, you're testing yourself, I'm just watching." That night he couldn't sleep. He sat outside the hangar, watching the stars bleed into the black. Anya was nearby, cleaning her rifle in the dim light of a lantern. The rhythm of her hands was hypnotic, a soft ritual that seemed older than war itself. After a while he spoke. "Do you ever think about them?" She didn't look up. "Every day." "And it doesn't fade?" "No." She wiped the barrel clean. "You just learn to live with ghosts. Sometimes they sit beside you. Sometimes they aim the gun." He swallowed, unsure whether she was speaking metaphorically or not. Then she said, "What about you, Reynolds? What are you afraid of losing?" He stared into the sand. "Respect." She nodded slowly. "Good. That means you still have something worth protecting." He looked at her. "And you?" She hesitated for the first time since he'd met her. Then she said quietly, "Control." The lantern flickered between them, light and shadow playing across her face. For a heartbeat, she didn't look like a soldier, she looked human. Tired, sad, unbreakably strong, and somehow unbearably fragile. "Chief," he began, then stopped. She looked up. "What?" "If you could go back, would you change anything?" Her answer came after a long silence. "No, but I'd listen more." "To what?" "The quiet before it all goes wrong." The next morning, the desert was still. The air was thick with heat and memory. Reynolds stood in front of the kill house, a makeshift structure built from shipping containers, riddled with bullet scars. Anya stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You remember the rules," she said. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage. Neutralize the threats, save the civilian." He nodded. "Speed, surprise, violence of action." She smirked faintly. "You remember his words, not mine." He frowned. "What are yours?" "Calm, clarity, purpose." He inhaled deeply. "Got it." The red light above the door blinked to life. Reynolds drew his weapon. No theatrics, no overconfidence. Just focus. The intercom buzzed. "Shooter ready." He steadied his breath. "Ready." "Execute." He moved. Not fast, not slow, just right. Each step controlled, each angle cleared, each corner sliced cleanly. 3 seconds later, 4 shots. 2 in the chest, 2 in the head. Hostage untouched. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was recognition. He turned toward the observation window, but there was no audience this time. No admiral, no crowd. Just her. Anya stood in the doorway, eyes steady. 2.9, she said softly, and alive. He exhaled, lowering his weapon. So, not perfect. She shook her head. Perfect is a myth, alive is a skill. He smiled faintly. Then I'll take it. She stepped closer, her voice lower now. You're starting to understand. What? That silence isn't the absence of sound, she said. It's the presence of control. That night he lay awake again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy, it was grounding. He realized that maybe the real lesson wasn't about guns or time or precision. Maybe it was about learning to live with the noise inside and choosing not to let it rule you. And as the desert wind whispered through the hangar walls, Reynolds understood why she'd never needed to prove herself. Because real warriors don't fight for validation. They fight for peace, even if they never find it. Somewhere in the distance, he thought he heard her voice, quiet and steady. Calm, clarity, purpose. And for the first time, he whispered it back. Not as an echo, but as a promise. What happens when the lesson becomes real? Reynolds didn't realize the question had left his mouth until he heard the echo of his own voice in the hangar. The morning sun bled through the sandstorm haze, painting the concrete in gold and ash. Anya was gone. Her cot was neatly folded, her weapon rack empty, her presence erased with the same precision she carried everywhere. Only a single note lay on the table, weighted by an empty magazine. Keep listening, you'll know when to move. He didn't understand what it meant, not yet, but his stomach told him it wasn't a metaphor. Outside, the desert air felt different. Helicopters, real ones, thundered in the distance, their blades slicing the silence like warning bells. And for the first time since his training began, Reynolds felt that old taste of adrenaline rise in his throat. He jogged toward the sound. The airstrip was alive now, trucks, gear, personnel. Whatever was happening wasn't a drill. Then he saw her. Anya stood near a transport chopper, already in gear, body armor, headset, weapon strapped across her chest. The calm in her eyes was the same as always. The air around her felt sharper, more focused. But there was something else too, something heavier. He approached, heart pounding. Chief, what's going on? She turned slightly, adjusting her rifle. Change of plans. Mission. Extraction op. Real world, you're not on the roster. Then why am I here? Because you're still asking permission. The rotor wash whipped sand across his face, stinging his eyes. You're taking me with you. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. You're observant. Reynolds hesitated. Why me? She looked at him, really looked. Because I need someone who listens, not someone who talks. Before he could respond, the door gunner waved. 2 minutes to lift, Chief. Anya nodded. Get in or get left. He didn't think, he moved. The chopper roared to life, dust and sun swirling into a storm. Inside, the team was small, 4 operators, faces hidden behind goggles and silence. No one spoke, no one needed to. Reynolds sat across from Anya, trying to keep his breath steady. This wasn't the kill house. This wasn't a classroom. This was the kind of moment that turned lessons into instinct, or mistakes into death. Over the headset, a voice crackled. Objective, down recon bird 10 clicks north of the ridge. Possible hostiles in the area. We move fast, recover data, exfil. Copy. Copy, Anya replied. Her tone was calm, unchanged. The same voice she'd used in training, like she could be describing a weather report instead of walking toward danger. Reynolds' pulse hammered in his ears. He looked out the open side door. The desert stretched forever, endless dunes, burnt sky, no escape. Anya leaned closer, voice low. You ready? He nodded. Then forget everything except the next breath. The chopper banked left. The pilot called out, "LZ in sight, 2 minutes." Anya checked her weapon, chambered around. Her movements were silent, practiced, deliberate, every click a rhythm of control. Reynolds mirrored her safety off, breath even, mind blank. "Remember," she said quietly, "calm, clarity, purpose." The bird touched down in a blast of dust. They dismounted fast, boots crunching, sand cutting against their visors. The wreck lay ahead, half-buried smoke rising. It looked eerily familiar. Reynolds realized it was almost identical to the one from her past, the same model, same shape, same ghosts. She didn't flinch, she moved first. "Two left, two right," she ordered. "I take point, Reynolds on me." They advanced in silence, scanning the dunes. No movement, just wind. "Too quiet." Anya stopped suddenly, raised her fist. Reynolds froze. She crouched, brushed her gloved hand across the sand, and found what she was looking for. Tracks fresh, human. "They're not far," she whispered. "Stay close." They reached the wreck, the twisted remains of a recon drone embedded in sand and scorched metal. Anya climbed inside, careful, deliberate. Reynolds covered the entry. The heat radiating off the metal made his eyes sting. "Data module secured," she said over comms. "Prep exfil." And then it happened. A sound, faint, distant, metallic. The distinct click of a safety being disengaged. Reynolds spun, heart leaping. "Contact." Gunfire tore through the silence. The sand exploded around them, bullets snapping past. The air filled with chaos. Anya moved like water, low, efficient, precise. 2 o'clock ridge, suppress and move. Reynolds dropped, returning fire, not panicked, not rushed, just controlled. Her voice cut through the noise. "Breathe, Reynolds. Don't chase the sound, chase the rhythm." He aligned his sights, exhaled and fired. One shot. Then another. 2 silhouettes dropped over the ridge. "Two down," he said. Anya nodded once. "Then move, always move." They bounded toward cover, sand spitting under their boots. Rounds pinged against the wreckage, whining like angry hornets. Reynolds felt the heat of adrenaline, the razor edge between focus and fear, but this time he didn't lose it. Anya paused behind the engine housing, peering over the top. 3 left, she muttered, flanking. "Orders." She looked at him. "You lead." He hesitated. "What?" "You heard me." Her tone wasn't commanding, it was trusting. Reynolds took a breath. "Left push, low angle, I'll draw fire on my mark." "Copy," she said. He counted silently, 1, 2, 3, then rolled out, firing 3 controlled bursts. The flankers broke cover, returning fire. Anya moved like a ghost, fast, surgical, exact. 3 shot, 3 falls, silence. The dust settled, the echoes faded. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind, slow, low, indifferent. Then Anya stood, lowering her weapon. "Status." "All clear," Reynolds said. His breath was steady, his aim true. No panic, no noise. She studied him, no smile, no approval, just a quiet nod. "You listened," she said. He looked around at the carnage. "They could have killed us." "They didn't," she replied, "because we stayed quiet long enough to hear them coming." They exfilled 20 minutes later. The chopper lifted, dragging dust and ghosts into the sky. Inside, Reynolds sat across from her again, only this time the silence felt earned, shared. He finally spoke. "You froze for a second when you saw the wreck." She didn't deny it. "You noticed. It looked like the one from your crash." She nodded slowly. "That's why I let you lead." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "Control isn't about never breaking," she said softly. "It's about knowing when you shouldn't be the one holding the trigger." He sat with that for a moment, then nodded. "You trusted me." I tested you, she said. Trust has to be earned twice, once in training, once in fire. The rotors roared above them, but her next words cut through cleanly. You passed both. He didn't smile, he didn't need to. Because for the first time, she didn't sound like an instructor. She sounded like someone who saw him, not as a cadet, but as a soldier. Back at base, the debrief was short. Admiral Hayes met them on the tarmac, face unreadable as always. He listened to the mission summary, nodded once and said, "Good work, both of you." Then, as the others dispersed, he pulled Anya aside. His tone dropped low. You okay? She gave a small shrug. It's just sand and ghosts. He looked at her for a long moment. You keep saying that like it doesn't matter. She met his eyes. If I let it matter, I stop functioning. Hayes sighed. That's not strength, Chief, that's survival. Sometimes they're the same thing. He didn't argue, he just nodded. Get some rest. But she didn't rest. She never did. That night, Reynolds sat outside the barracks again, the hum of distant generators filling the dark. He watched the stars calm, endless, unjudging. He thought about everything she'd said. Calm, clarity, purpose. They weren't just words, they were a code. A way to exist when the noise of the world threatened to drown you. He understood something now, something the textbooks never mentioned. Strength wasn't measured in medals or ranks. It was measured in how quietly you carried what tried to destroy you. Inside, he could hear her voice faintly from the operations tent, low, steady, instructing another team for a new mission. He smiled to himself. The cadet who once laughed at her was gone. In his place stood someone different, someone listening. And though neither of them would ever admit it, they had saved each other in their own way. One through silence, the other through learning how to live inside it. What do you hear when everything else stops? The question came from Anya, but she wasn't asking him. She was staring out into the night, beyond the camp's perimeter lights, beyond the edge of the desert itself. The air was still. Even the wind had gone quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. Reynolds didn't answer. He knew better than to fill her silence with words. Sometimes the right response was to just listen. She turned toward him, her expression calm, but her eyes carried a fatigue that ran deeper than sleep. I used to think silence meant peace, she said softly. Now I know it just means you survived longer than the others. He watched her sit on the low wall near the hangar, rifle balanced across her knees. The lantern light flickered against her scarred hands. He realized she wasn't resting, she was remembering. He wanted to ask, but didn't have to. She started speaking before the thought became words. It was Kandahar, she said quietly, winter of 2014. Her voice dropped to that low, measured tone, the kind that comes when memory hurts but has been repeated enough times to sound like someone else's story. We were tasked with securing a compound used for signal relay. Routine. Only routine never means what they tell you. She stared at the sand. There was a family inside, locals, wrong place, wrong night, a boy, maybe 10. He ran out during the breach. My team didn't see him. Reynolds' breath caught, but she kept talking. I yelled too late. One of ours fired, reflex. She paused. The shot hit clean. He was gone before he hit the ground. Silence. A different kind now, heavier, crueler. I froze, she said, for the first time in my life, and in that moment I broke the rule. I let noise take over. I screamed. I dragged him inside, tried to call for medevac even though I knew it didn't matter. The others had to pull me out. Her voice didn't crack, it was too disciplined for that, but her eyes shimmered with something close to grief. They told me it wasn't my fault, but that's what people say when they want to move on faster than you can. Reynolds looked down, unsure if she wanted comfort or punishment. She didn't want either. I made a decision after that, she continued. No more noise, no more emotion. If I couldn't save everyone, I'd at least never freeze again. She looked at him. That's the difference between us, Reynolds. You're still trying to become someone. I'm just trying not to disappear. He met her gaze. You didn't disappear, you just hid where no one could reach you. She almost smiled, almost. You're starting to sound like Hayes. Maybe he's right, Reynolds said. Maybe silence isn't strength, maybe it's just armor. Armor keeps you alive, she replied. Until it keeps you alone, he countered. The faintest flicker crossed her face. Pain, memory, truth. She didn't answer. The next morning, orders came down. Another mission, another desert, another echo of the past. Admiral Hayes briefed them personally. His voice was grave, deliberate. Intel confirms insurgent cell operating near the southern corridor. They have hostages, local engineers working under NATO contract. Small team insertion, low visibility. He looked at Anya. You'll lead. She didn't blink. Rules of engagement. Non-lethal unless necessary. She nodded once. Copy. Then Hayes' gaze shifted to Reynolds. You're her second. Reynolds froze. Sir. No objections, Hayes said firmly. You've trained with her, you understand how she works. You'll move as one. Reynolds felt the weight of that command settle deep in his chest. This wasn't a simulation, this was real. And this time, the consequences wouldn't end with applause or debriefs. They moved out at dusk, 6 operators, one purpose. The desert swallowed sound, as it always did. Anya led the formation, scanning the horizon through her NVGs. Every step was deliberate, measured, controlled. They reached the compound just before midnight, a cluster of crumbling mud walls and steel doors hidden in the dunes. Through the headset, her voice was calm. 2 guards outside, 1 tower, light patrol rotation every 30 seconds. Reynolds' left flank, I'll take the tower. Copy. He moved silently along the wall, his breath steady, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm she drilled into him. Calm, clarity, purpose. Then movement. A guard stepped out of the doorway, cigarette glowing faintly. Reynolds raised his weapon, finger brushing the trigger. But before he could act, a suppressed pop cracked through the night. The guard dropped silently. Anya's voice followed, soft. You're a half-second slow. He grinned despite the adrenaline. You're impossible. Only if you stop learning, she said. They breached. Inside, the air smelled of oil and sweat and fear. 3 hostages, bound and terrified, huddled in the corner. Anya motioned for Reynolds to secure them while she swept the rooms. Everything was going smooth, too smooth. He'd learned to distrust that. Then a sound, a whisper of movement behind the steel door at the end of the hall. Chief, he began, but she was already moving. The door exploded inward. 2 hostiles rushed out, weapons raised. She dropped one with 2 shots, the other fired wild. Reynolds ducked, returned fire, 1 clean burst, silence. Clear, she said, voice even. He exhaled, adrenaline burning through his veins. We good. Almost. Then came the scream. High-pitched, small, human. Reynolds froze. What was that? Anya turned sharply. The sound came from a side room, the one she hadn't cleared yet. She moved fast, kicked the door open, and stopped dead. A child. Maybe 8, maybe 9. Hiding under a table, trembling, hands pressed over his ears. Time froze. Reynolds watched her expression shift, just slightly but enough. He knew this look. He'd seen it once before when Hayes had told him about Kandahar. Chief, he said quietly. She didn't move. Her weapon hung loose, her breathing shallow. He took a step closer. Anya, it's okay, he's alive, we can get him out. Her eyes flicked toward the boy, then back to the rifle in her hands. Her silence cracked. He could see it, the tremor in her shoulders, the faint tremble of her grip. "Chief," he said again, "you're not there, you're here." She blinked once, twice. The sound of her breath came back, steady but strained. And then control. She slung her weapon, crouched down, and spoke softly to the boy in Pashto. Her tone changed, gentle, soothing. After a moment, the boy crawled into her arms. Reynolds watched her hold him, and for the first time, she didn't look like the unbreakable operator he'd trained under. She looked human, fragile, real, almost breaking, and somehow stronger than ever. They exfiltrated before dawn. No casualties, all hostages safe. The sun broke over the desert like forgiveness. On the flight back, no one spoke. The hum of the rotors filled the silence, and somewhere in that noise, there was peace. Anya sat across from Reynolds, the boy asleep in her lap, head resting against her vest. Her eyes were distant but calm. "You did good," he said quietly. She looked up. "We did good." He hesitated. "You froze, didn't you?" She didn't deny it for a second. "And you came back." She nodded. "Because someone reminded me where I was." Reynolds smiled faintly. "Guess we're even." Her lips curved just slightly. "Not yet, you still owe me a perfect shot." He chuckled. "Perfect, a myth, remember." "Maybe," she said, "but it's still worth chasing." When they landed, Admiral Hayes was waiting on the tarmac. He said nothing at first, just studied the pair of them, one hardened by silence, the other transformed by it. Finally, he said, "Heard you brought everyone home." Anya nodded, "Including myself this time." Hayes' eyes softened. "Good, about time." She turned to Reynolds. "He's ready, Admiral." "For what?" Reynolds asked. Hayes smiled. "For the quiet that comes after." That night the camp was still again. Anya sat alone outside, watching the stars. Reynolds joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. "You know," he said, "you were wrong about silence." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "It doesn't just mean survival," he said. "Sometimes it means peace after the noise is gone." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I just never stayed quiet long enough to find out." The two of them sat there, not speaking, not needing to. And for once the silence didn't hurt. It healed. Because silence isn't the end of a story. Sometimes it's the sound of one finally being understood. What happens when the voice that taught you silence goes quiet? Reynolds found himself asking that question long after the mission was over. Days passed in a blur after action reports, routine drills, the same gray corridors of base life, but something felt wrong. Not in the air, not in the schedule. In him. He hadn't seen Anya for 3 days. Her bunk was made, her gear was gone. No goodbye, no note. Just absence, clean, deliberate, silent. He went to Hayes. "Where is she?" The Admiral didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, the light of dawn cutting through the blinds. Finally he said, "She's been reassigned." "To where?" "Classified." Reynolds clenched his fists. "After what she's been through, you're sending her out again." Hayes turned. "She volunteered." He didn't know what to say to that. "She doesn't stop," Hayes added quietly, "because if she does, she has to feel it, and she's not ready for that." Reynolds stared at the floor. "Neither am I." 2 weeks passed. The base felt emptier without her voice, the calm precision of her orders, the quiet steadiness that made chaos feel almost manageable. He trained harder, pushed further. But every round he fired sounded different now, too loud, too hollow. He realized then that silence wasn't something she'd given him. It was something she'd left behind. Then one night the call came. Emergency deployment. No warning, no details. He suited up before the briefing even finished. Old habits, her habits. The mission was simple on paper: recon and extraction of a lost Allied unit near the coastal ridge. Terrain rough. Hostile activity confirmed. Command structure compromised. He scanned the roster. 5 names. None hers. They lifted at dawn, the sea a sheet of silver beneath them. The pilot said little, the rest of the team said less. Reynolds sat in silence, feeling the vibration of the chopper through his gear. It reminded him of the first time he'd flown with her, how she told him to listen to the rhythm of the blades, not the noise of his fear. He tried, but something in the air felt wrong. They touched down near the ridge, smoke rising in the distance. The moment his boots hit the ground, he knew. "Stay sharp," he said. "This isn't clean." They moved fast, formation tight, eyes scanning the terrain. Wreckage lay ahead, half hidden in brush. Not a drone this time, a transport. Bodies. 2 American, 3 local contractors. No survivors. One of the medics crouched. "Sir, this one's got a tag." Reynolds stepped closer, heart pounding. The tag was black, scorched at the edge, standard for covert ops. But the letters carved into it froze his blood. SHARMA, A. He felt everything stop. The desert, the team, the sound. "No," he whispered, "that's not possible." The medic looked up, confused. "You knew her." He didn't answer. He couldn't. He snatched the tag, staring at it as if it might change under his gaze. The edges were rough, the engraving half melted. But it was hers. Back at base, Hayes met him before he even landed. He didn't speak at first, just nodded once, eyes heavy. "She was leading a shadow retrieval," Hayes said quietly. "No comms, no backup. She went dark 5 days ago." Reynolds' voice cracked. "You knew." "I hoped I was wrong." "What happened?" "They found the bodies near the extraction point. No survivors." Reynolds' chest tightened. "She wouldn't." "I know," Hayes said. "That's what makes it harder to believe." He dropped the tag into Reynolds' palm. "Officially, she's MIA, unofficially." He paused. "She saved a team of civilians before going dark. They said she drew fire so the others could escape." Reynolds' throat ached. "She said she'd never freeze again." "She didn't," Hayes replied. "She just stopped running." That night, Reynolds couldn't sleep. He sat where she used to sit, the low wall near the hangar, staring at the horizon. The wind carried sand across the concrete, whispering like memory. He turned the tag in his hand. The weight of it was unbearable. He thought about all the things she'd said, the lessons buried in every silence. Calm, clarity, purpose. He whispered the words to himself. But they didn't feel like training anymore. They felt like a prayer. Days turned to weeks. Her absence became part of the air, not sharp anymore, just constant. The base went on, missions continued, life somehow resumed. Until one morning, a package arrived. No return address, no sender. Just a small metal box. Inside, a drive, a folded note, and a single bullet casing engraved with her initials. Reynolds stared at it for a long time before he opened the note. "If this reaches you, I didn't make it back, but that's all right. Some people are built to stay, others to go quiet. Don't waste silence on grief. Use it to hear what others miss. The mission never ends, it just changes hands." Yes. He closed his eyes. Later that night, he plugged in the drive. It contained nothing operational, no intel, no maps. Just one video, grainy, low light, recorded in a tent. Anya sat in frame, uniform undone, eyes tired but steady. She looked directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means I did what I came to do. You'll want answers, don't. Answers are for the living. I've made peace with the noise I caused." She paused, breath slow. "I once told you silence was control. I was wrong. It's acceptance of loss, of failure, of yourself. She smiled faintly, the kind that never reached her eyes. Don't be me, Reynolds, be better. Lead with quiet, not fear. And if anyone ever holds a gun to your head, smile. Because they'll never understand that you've already made peace with whatever happens next. The video cut out. He sat there for a long time. Not crying, not angry. Just listening to the hum of the projector, the faint buzz of the lights, the small, human sounds of a world she no longer inhabited. And then he whispered, calm, clarity, purpose. For her, for himself, for everything she'd left behind. Weeks later, he stood in front of the new recruits. Their faces were young, eager, terrified, just like his once was. He took a breath, scanning the crowd. You want to know what makes a soldier, he said softly. It's not strength, it's not rank, it's not how loud you shout. He held up the dog tag. It's how you handle silence. Because one day it's all you'll have left, and if you can live inside it, you'll never truly be alone. The room stayed quiet. Not because they were scared, but because somehow they understood. That night, alone again by the hangar wall, he looked up at the stars. The desert was still, the air clean. He didn't imagine her voice this time. He just felt it, a presence in the calm, a shadow in the wind. He smiled faintly. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that silence, she was still teaching him how to listen. What do you do when the voice that guided you is gone, but you can still hear it anyway? Reynolds stood alone on the tarmac before dawn, the air cold enough to sting his lungs. The desert was still, painted in shades of blue and gray, the kind of silence that felt both alive and infinite. He adjusted his vest, checked his weapon, and waited for the rest of his team to arrive. Today wasn't just another mission. It was his first command. Admiral Hayes had said it simply. She taught you how to lead, now show me that she didn't waste it. He hadn't replied. He just nodded, because words never did her justice. The briefing was short. A rogue convoy had gone missing near the border, carrying humanitarian supplies and one undercover operative. The mission was to locate, recover, and extract quietly. It was the kind of assignment Anya would have taken without hesitation. Now it was his. As the chopper blades spun to life, he closed his eyes for a moment. He could almost hear her voice, steady, grounded, calm. Don't chase the noise, find the rhythm. He smiled slightly, gripping the edge of his seat. Copy that, Chief, he whispered. The flight was quiet. No one spoke much, not because of nerves, but because silence had become something sacred. The team respected that. When they landed, the air was thick with dust and tension. The convoy's last known location was a canyon, narrow, winding, and perfect for an ambush. He didn't like it. Too many blind corners, too much echo. He signaled for the team to move slow. Eyes up, he murmured. If it feels wrong, it usually is. The men nodded. They trusted him. He didn't take that lightly. Every step echoed with memory. Every decision felt like a reflection of her training. Calm, clarity, purpose. Then came the first sound, faint, metallic. Not wind. A latch. A trigger. Down, he barked. The explosion tore through the canyon mouth, dirt and rock raining from above. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing. Ambush, someone shouted. Gunfire erupted, chaotic, deafening. He crawled to cover, pulling a bleeding teammate behind a rock. Stay with me. His heart pounded, but his breathing stayed steady. He remembered her words. Calm, clarity, purpose. He peeked over the ridge. 4 hostiles, higher ground. Bad position. He keyed the radio. Bravo team, flank left, use the ridge, I'll draw. Sir, that's suicide. He smiled grimly, only if you stop listening. He popped smoke and fired 3 rounds precise, measured. The gunfire shifted toward him. His team moved unseen through the dust. Seconds felt like hours. Then silence. The last shot echoed, then faded. Clear, someone called. He exhaled, chest heaving, the dust thick in his throat. They found the convoy 1/2 mile down the canyon. Trucks burned out, twisted, stripped of supplies. But there was movement, faint, under one of the wrecks. Reynolds crouched, clearing debris with his hands. A woman dehydrated, wounded but alive. The undercover operative. He pulled her out gently. You're safe now. She blinked, weakly smiling. Who are you? He hesitated. Someone who learned from the best. She frowned slightly. The woman, the one who warned us before the convoy left, was that. He nodded before she finished. Yeah, that was her. She reached out, gripping his sleeve. She said if we ever got hit out here, someone would come, someone who listens. He didn't speak, couldn't. He just looked at the horizon, endless sand, endless sky, and for a second he could swear he saw her standing there. Back at base, the debrief was quiet. Hayes listened to the report, expression unreadable. When it was over, he said only, "You brought them all home." Reynolds nodded. That's what she would have done. Hayes studied him for a long moment. You sound like her. He smiled faintly. No, sir, I just finally understood her. Hayes looked at the dog tag around Reynolds' neck, the one engraved AS, and gave a slow nod. Then she'd be proud. That evening, the base was bathed in orange light. The wind carried sand across the empty tarmac. Reynolds stood by the wall, her wall, the one she'd always leaned on when the world went quiet. He took off the tag and placed it on the stone. It wasn't goodbye. It was acknowledgment. He sat for a while, watching the horizon fade into dusk. Every sound, every distant echo of engines, every whisper of wind felt like part of her. He remembered the first time they met, her calm defiance, the way she'd held a gun to the cadet's head not in anger, but in principle. Never threaten someone who's already made peace with silence. Now he understood. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the one he'd started after she disappeared. Inside were her phrases, written over and over like mantras. At the bottom of the page, he added one more line. Silence isn't absence. It's everything you don't need to say to be understood. He closed the book. Months later, he found himself back in the field, different team, different mission. He didn't wear rank on his sleeve. He didn't shout commands. He just moved calm, deliberate, sure. When the younger soldiers asked how he stayed so centered, he only said, I had a teacher once. She believed the loudest thing a person can do is act with quiet purpose. They didn't fully understand, not yet, but someday they would. Because silence, he realized, wasn't something you inherited. It was something you earned. Night fell over the desert. He sat by the ridge, the stars burning above like watchful eyes. Somewhere in the distance, the wind carried a whisper, soft, familiar, almost kind. Not words, not sound. Just presence. He smiled. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something. He just was. And in that stillness, she was there, not as a ghost, not as regret, but as the quiet truth that had always guided him. Because silence wasn't her curse. It was her gift. A way to live without fear. A way to lead without noise. A way to end without saying goodbye. He stood, looking toward the horizon, golden light breaking over the sand. A new day. A new rhythm. A new silence. He whispered the words one last time. Calm, clarity, purpose. And somewhere, beyond the dunes and distance, the wind carried back the faintest echo. as if she'd whispered, "Good, you finally listened." Because in the end, the greatest lesson she ever taught him was this: sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.